Okay, so we're going to talk about wax working. There's really 3 different types of wax that we use here in the metalsmithing studio, and they're separated by various degrees of hardness. Okay, and so the softest wax that we use is this stuff. I commonly refer to this as sculpture wax. It's a microcrystalline wax. It's incredibly soft, and so if you break off a little piece and you warm it up with your hands, you can start molding this wax like clay. And that's a real benefit because if you're used to working with clay, this behaves a lot like clay. You can separate it, you can join it back together, just really by squeezing. Because it's so pliable, it can be kind of challenging for this stuff to accept really fine detail. And so if you want to get in there and start carving it and stuff like that, sometimes you need to step away from it for a little bit and kind of cool off. But you know, we can take our wax carving tools, and we don't even really need to use any heat or anything. You know, just add some textures. We can take this and press it against stuff. So I'm picking up this kind of waffly checkerboard pattern. I can press it against other things. Texture is one of the most important elements when we are dealing with casting. Any texture that is in the wax is going to be transferred into your metal. And so even all my fingerprints and stuff like that that are on this particular piece of wax would be transferred to metal. The white wax works exactly the same. You know, you can cut off a chunk, you know, and just start working it just like the other stuff. We can join brown to white. Just understand that all of this will be metal. So there's not going to be any color difference between these two, okay? The next type of wax is the stuff that the bookstore sells. This is the pink sheet wax, okay? So it is kind of in the middle as far as the hardness. It's rather pliable. We can bend it. We can do all kinds of stuff to manipulate this. I can cut this. Don't want to cut into the bench, so I'm cutting up in the air. Fortunately, my utility X-Acto knife is quite sharp. Anytime I want to join this, I need to use some heat. And the preferred method of heating is to use an alcohol lamp. Now, this alcohol lamp is filled with denatured alcohol, which you just get at the hardware store. I have a few cans, I keep a few cans of it here in our solvent cabinet, which was included in the tour of the building. And denatured alcohol burns very, very clean. Cleanliness in your wax is pretty important. If you get stuff in there that doesn't burn out, it could end up kind of just floating around in that void and then end up as a contaminant or something in your actual cast. So you want a really clean flame. The denatured alcohol does that. You don't really want to use candle flames if you're trying to do this at home, because they're going to deposit a lot of soot and ash onto your tools, and then that's going to be transferred into your work. I'm going to put a video together on how to make a very simple alcohol lamp using a baby food container, so that should be up sometime soon. So This is one of the only times that using a lighter is acceptable in this studio. We can use our lighter to light our alcohol lamp. We have a lot of different waxworking tools. A lot of them are these kind of sort of cheap Harbor Freight carving tools and needles and things like that. Do have a handful of actual dental tools. When I was in school, I asked my dentist if he had any extra tools, and he was like, yeah, because they come in these big sets, you know, and dentists have their favorites that they use regularly out of those sets, and then the other ones just kind of don't get used at all. And so, you know, next time you're at your dentist, ask your dentist if he or she's got any extra tools. So with the pink wax, if it's warm, I can sort of press it together and it sort of sticks, okay? But that is not a good joint at all. What I really need to do is I need to weld those two together. And so in order to do that, you basically need to get both sides of this joint molten. And so I'm heating up my tool, and then I'm basically running it along that line and essentially welding it together. Now, you want to take a little bit of time when you're working with the wax. And so, I don't know if this is going to show up or not, but pay attention to what the wax looks like. When it's this kind of white, chalky looking color, it's really fragile. So you'll see the wax, it'll be completely liquid, and then it starts to dry and it kind of gets this sort of white, chalky color. It can just kind of crumble. So take your time when you're putting things together. Allow that wax to cool and solidify and stabilize. So with the pink wax, I can take this form and I can build it up and then I can carve it back. I can do that with or without the use of heat. Making this weird little box form here. Now, the pink wax is in sheets, and there's kind of a rule that you don't cast something that you could fabricate. Because the cast, you know, if you can make it out of sheet metal, you should make it out of sheet metal. Casting is different than sheet. So I'm getting an X-Acto knife here that's already been heated. You can see the blade's all black and there's some extra wax on it. And I'm using that to cut. And unfortunately, I think this blade is black because somebody used a candle. Do you see the dirt on there? So I'm not going to take the time to make something fancy. We can add texture to the pink sheet wax in much the same way that we were adding texture before. You can heat up a needle tool and add funky little droplets of wax. Make it look like water or BBs and things like that. Basically, you know, the idea is to experiment, play around. You know, your first cast shouldn't be anything that you invest a whole lot of time into. Consider it an experiment. You're just learning the process. You're not trying to make a fine, wonderful piece of art. I expect you to make multiple objects through the use of casting. So, you know, have some ideas, but get that first one invested so you can cast it as quickly as possible, so you can learn the process. And then the last type of wax that we use here is our file wax. Okay, it's very hard. You do not use heat with file wax. It just kind of gets melty and gummy. Okay, so the first step in making a high dome hollow ring is to make the decision on how wide this ring is going to be. You know, basically that's sort of how much of your finger is that ring going to take up. I need to know my widest point. And the easiest way to cut that, you know, we're going to carve this out of this blue wax. The easiest way to do that is to use the bandsaw here. So before I show you how to make the cut, I need to talk about the bandsaw. This is called a bandsaw because the blade is a continuous band that goes around and around and around. It cuts on the downstroke, okay? And so this saw was designed to cut wood. It will definitely cut you. So with that being said, no part of you is in this little black square. The black square is there for making blade adjustments and table adjustments and things like that, but I consider this black square basically no man's land. You know, anything that goes in this area could be cut. So if I'm cutting something and my fingers have to get too close to that blade, cut it by hand. You're probably going to do a better job anyways. This bandsaw, like all electrical devices in the studio, safety glasses are absolutely required. When you're cutting objects on the bandsaw, you want everything free of the blade path, so don't force stuff into the blade path. You know, basically hold items like this, so your fingers and everything are out of the way of that blade. This is the blade guide. It raises up and down, so there's a little nut to loosen on the back, and then with this one I can raise it up and down. And you really want that blade guide, you know, to be relatively close to the material that you're working. The farther away that is, that blade has a tendency to wander back and forth, and you're not going to have as accurate of a cut. We can adjust the angle of the table, which would adjust the angle of the cut. Normally, the only thing that we're using this for in this studio is cutting the blue wax. So, you know, we can assume that it's set pretty square. So, I need to decide how wide this ring is going to be, and we'll go with a relatively wide one. Okay, so this area sticking out here is going to be how wide my ring is. And I'm going to get something sharp and just basically scribe a line. So I'm using the square because I want a nice straight square line. Okay, this stuff is relatively expensive, so if you have the inclination to make something very large, I would encourage you and request that you use the recycled blue wax. The great thing about this is, unless it's not too dirty, we can melt this stuff down, the stuff that is excess, and melt it down and pour it into blocks and reuse it. Okay, so I have my line, I have my table set, I'm wearing my safety glasses, I don't have anything dangly on my body that could pull me into this machine. I'm going to go ahead and now, I hope you noticed how long it took for that blade to stop. What you never, ever want to do is reach for something or do this as that blade's still moving. That's actually one of the reasons, one of the most common reasons that people get injured on this machine. So I took my time, and now I have a very nice, flat piece of material that I can work with for my high dome hollow ring. I can actually get a number of rings out of this. I could probably get 2 or 3. Depending on my design. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is sand this thing flat. I want to get rid of all these big lines and everything. The best way to do that is to go in a circular motion or a figure 8. I don't really have the coordination to do a figure 8, so I tend to go in a circle. If you go side to side like this, you have a tendency to sand a curve into your material. I have a piece of coarse sandpaper taped to this steel block that's in the back of the room, and it gives a really nice surface to sand everything flat. I want to do both sides. And I'm trying to make sure that everything stays nice and parallel. I don't want a wedge-shaped piece of wax. Okay, so I'm back downstairs at the big drill press, because what I need to do is I need to drill a big hole in this surface that's going to be the inside of my ring. So in order to do that, I need to know what size my ring needs to be. So if I'm making this for myself, let's say I'm making a really awesome pinky ring, because that's totally something that I would wear. I'm going to keep trying these rings on until I get one that is snug over my finger. But not so tight that it's going to cause me problems. Yeah, see, like that one's too tight. Right here on the back is a little number, and that is a number 8. I don't really need to know that number 8, because basically what I'm going to do next is I need to find one of the paddle bits that's on the wall right here that fits inside this ring. That aside. And see, that one is too big. So putting the paddle bit in the drill press is just the same as any other drill bit, only we want to make sure that we are tightening the chuck down on this hexagonally cut end. And put that up in there as far as I can. Hold on to the paddle bit until it's securely in the drill press. Next, I'm going to lower the table because this is entirely too close. Hold on to the table, loosen. Okay, so I need to make sure that this paddle bit is going to go through that hole. I could use a block of wood under this. For this case, I'm not going to. I'm just going to make sure I'm going through that piece of wood. Now, what I need to do, and the reason why it was so important that I have this piece of material parallel is I'm going to drill partially the way in on one side, and then I need to flip this over and drill in from the other side. If I try to drill the whole way through this, it'll break out of that back end. It's not going to have a nice cut on the one side. If I have a wedge-shaped piece of material, those drill holes are going to come in at an angle to each other. You know, they're not going to be nice and straight into each other. Take your time, nice and slow. Starting to carve into okay. That's about as far as I'm going to go on that side. I like to be able to see what I'm doing. See how I went far enough that I have a nice little hole? I really didn't go that deep. You don't have to go super deep. Yep. Once that piece drops out, you're done. Now all of this wax can be recycled. So if it's clean, even the little piece that came out of the middle, if it's clean, save it. You know, if there were a lot of sawdust or metal shavings and things like that all over this drill press when I started, I wouldn't be able to save that material. So clean your area. Last thing to do, take our paddle bit and put it away. Hold on to the paddle bit, loosen the chuck. We're going to put this back where it lives. Okay, so my next step after I've drilled my hole is to size my ring. And if you recall, I need a size 8. This is our wax ring sizer. Okay, it is basically a tapered piece of wood with a little blade that runs along here. And so what I do is I just twist in my wax ring blank and it shaves material away. Turn it around and do the other side because it's a tapered hole. Okay, so we're back here at the bench and we are going to cut out the outer profile. Okay, so basically the exterior shape of our ring. And so since I'm doing a generic high dome hollow ring, it's just going to be round. It's not going to be anything special, but you can literally make these things any shape that you want. Remember, you don't even have to make a ring. This anvil, this little silver anvil pin that I made years ago, this was made with file wax. I had a lot of control over the file wax. It holds a lot of detail. So basically, I'm going to create like a little offset, I think, for this, where it's going to be narrower at the bottom than it is at the top. And it's kind of a generic design, but it's really common for good reasons. So this is going to be tapered at the bottom. A ring that's tapered at the bottom is going to be more comfortable, because when you open and close your fingers, there's going to be less material down at the bottom. So in order to cut this out, I'm going to use my jeweler saw, but I have changed the blade. This is not a jeweler saw blade. This is a spiral blade. It's actually in there upside down. And so a jeweler saw blade will not cut the file wax. The teeth are too fine. And so you need something that's a little bit more aggressive. And so you can get the spiral saw blades from the hardware store. I have a pack of them here, but when that pack is gone, then they're gone. So this is going to be really important that we keep our saw straight up and down when we're cutting. If I'm this way or that way, I'm going to have a really awkward cut. So I want to keep it straight up and down. And then there we go. My ring blank is cut out. Now I have some areas where I went outside of the line. That's totally fine. It's not a big deal. If I cut in too far, then I have to file everything down to that stage. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is I need to file this outer profile. And in order to do that, I went back to our really big aggressive file in the tool cabinet. I'm going to hold my ring in the ring clamp, and I'm holding my ring straight and holding my file flat. Now when I'm filing around in a curved motion. I'm not filing straight. I know it kind of looks like that in the video. And so from here, I'm really carefully adjusting my profile. So that everything is nice and straight. I don't know if you can see this in the video or not, but basically looking at that profile, you want it nice and straight and flat. Okay, so when you're inspecting your profile, you want to look for any areas where it's thick and then thin and then thick and then thin. You want your transitions to be nice and smooth and even. Now, if you want a wavy ring, that's fine. but it needs to look intentional. Anywhere that there's like a little thick bump or a little thin area, it's going to be problematic. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with what this is looking like. My next step is to determine how narrow I want this ring to be on the bottom. And so in order to do that, I'm going to take dividers. Okay, there's a bunch of dividers in a drawer marked dividers in the tool cabinet. And I'm going to adjust the dividers to scribe a line on both sides of this. That way I'm taking the same amount of material off both sides and I don't end up with a slanted ring. So on the very thinnest part on the bottom, I'm going to make a line on that side, turn it over, and make a line on this side. You can see those two lines. Basically, those are reference lines that I'm going to file to. Now, every step in this process, this is a very particular order, because at any moment I can work this piece of wax and it can break. And I never recommend trying to fix the blue wax. You're going to spend more time trying to fix it than you would if you just started a new one. So each step is a slightly less aggressive step, putting slightly less stress on the wax. So I'm holding this at an angle. And I'm just filing down to that reference mark. I'm pretty much there. I'm going to go around the other side. Okay, so I have my taper roughed in. What I need to do next is I need to go back to the sandpaper and smooth it out. So here I am at my piece of sandpaper again, and I'm going to go ahead and smooth this out. Give myself a nice flat profile. Okay, it's looking good. Okay, so now I'm at the point where I'm going to hollow out the inside of this ring. Now there's a few benefits for doing that. One of the biggest benefits is you're reducing the amount of material that you're using. So if this was a gold ring and I want to save on a little cost, there's no reason to have all this gold locked up inside this ring. You can get the look of a pretty substantial ring without having a lot of material locked in there. Another reason is it makes it more comfortable. And so, having less material for your finger to be against and it causes sweating and discomfort. So I need to choose the proper wax burr to hollow this out. We have these medium size wax burrs. Okay, it's just a little ball burr at the end there. We have larger ones. And you can see that it's got little ridges to cut. We have these tiny ones for really tiny detail. Really tough to see on the camera. And then we have different shapes too. There's triangle ones, there's cylindrical ones, there's this wheel that'll cut a channel, into things. And so it's really your preference as far as which one you're going to use. And I'm going to start with our big one. Set that aside. Another thing, because I'm working with such fine detail, I'm going to use the OptiVisor. It's a magnifying glass, and it just is going to help me see what's going on in there a little bit better. Going to put my burr into our flex shaft. Now the burrs work a little bit opposite than the drill bits. You want the burr going at a pretty high speed. Okay, so I need to watch how close I get to the edge because I don't want to make this sharp. And if I happen to kick this out to the side, then that's going to be a big problem. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with how deep that is. I've removed a good amount of material. Now the great thing about the file wax is it's translucent. So you can get a gauge of how thick it is by how much light is passing through that. And so you know, I can even show you how to make a wax gauge where you're filing steps into a piece of wax to compare. Okay, so this last step, we're going to take our square profile and turn it into a curved outer profile. Since I carved a curved or concave void, you know, I'm just basically creating a generic curve on the outside. I could have carved anything in this. I could have done like an S shape and have the exterior correspond with that. Really, it's your design. You can do what you want. So I'm going to start by knocking the corners off. And I'm paying attention to my thickness because I carved into this pretty deep. So once I have my outer profile roughed out with the file, I'm going to switch to the sandpaper. You could even step down to a slightly less aggressive file. Now, when we switch to the sandpaper, I'm going to tear off like a little 1.5, 2-inch square. And I'm even going to take this and fold it. This is one of those cases where a sanding stick is not going to be your friend because it's flat. My fingers are not flat. So I can get a nicer profile by holding the sandpaper in my fingers. So I'm not quite there, but I'm pretty satisfied with this. You want to get this ring as refined as possible in the wax because then that's less work to do once it's metal. I hear a lot of students say, oh, I'll just clean it up when it's metal. Well, the last time I checked, wax is a lot softer than metal. It's a lot easier to sand and file. I can go up in grits and sandpaper too if I choose. But for now, I'm pretty satisfied with this for the demonstration's sake. All right, so I have 3 different objects that I've just kind of thrown together here and out of 3 different waxes. Now that I have those finished, I need to attach sprues to them. The sprue is the gateway to get the molten metal from the outside of the mold to the inside of the mold. And so in order to do that, I need to light my alcohol lamp. So we keep the sprue wax separate. The sprue wax are these little pink rods. They're really only intended to be sprues. I don't really want anybody making pieces out of them because it's not the best quality and it ends up looking like you made your piece out of sprue wax. So just like before how we had to weld our pieces together, you have to weld the sprue wax on to the sprue. Or onto your object. It's really important that you get a strong, secure connection. Also, placement of that sprue is very important. So if I have something that is square, like this particular piece right here, I would not want my sprue to come straight into it, like say in the bottom. That means that that metal has to travel this way and then travel over. It's much better for the metal to come in this way. So it'll be coming in and then it moves up at a 45-degree angle instead of a 90. Placement of your sprue is really important because you want the metal to travel into your mold as easily as possible. You also want to not trap air. So if I put my sprue at the bottom of this ring, that's the most logical place because chances are there isn't any detail there. However, this is a hollow ring, so if I do that, when it is in the flask sitting this way, then sitting this way, I guess, then it's going to trap air when we pour the plaster in. So this, we have to allow for that air to escape. You know, if you have an area of high detail, you don't want to put your sprue near that because everywhere that the sprue is, you have to sand and file that area. So a placement of the sprue is really important. So for this particular piece, I'm going to put the sprue on one of the corners. And for the pink wax, we can just kind of mash that in. But I still need to heat up some wax and weld that on. So I'm heating up my tool. And for this one where we can just kind of lay everything flat, it's pretty easy. And I'm just kind of building this up because this tool was pretty hot. I'm going to switch tools. The more mass the tool has, the more heat it's going to retain. So I'm just letting this cool for a minute. While I'm letting that cool, I can maybe work on this one. So sometimes if you get the sprue wax a little warm and you just kind of smush it up on there, sometimes I'll lay something down like this just to kind of prop that up a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch the pink wax into the blue wax, go around about half of it and just wait and let that cool. So with this particular one, I'm working around what was sitting on the table, and you see how soft that wax gets. So we really need to take our time and don't rush things. And then finally this weird little thing. Okay, so with this particular one right here, I have a problem. I have a piece that's hanging down farther than the connection of the sprue. I really have two options. Number one, I can take the sprue and bend it so that it's touching that part. The other option would have been I can make a branch that goes over to that piece. So these are all nice and secure, but they're way too long. There's no reason for these sprues to be this long. So I have a couple options. I can basically weld all of the sprues together and then bend these apart like that. Or I can cut them and attach them to a tree. I think I'm gonna bend them, weld them all together. I just think that's going to be an easier way to do this. You want to think about the volume of metal that you need to go into your mold. Basically, everything that you make out of wax is now going to be metal. And if you think about it, if it's plumbing, right? And you have this huge bucket that you want to fill, and you only have a really teeny tiny hose to fill it, you're probably not going to get the volume of water that you want. Same thing with casting metal. You know, that's why this main sprue is going to be double or triple one of these singles, because it's splitting as it goes. So you want your objects as close as they can be without touching. So they're fairly close to each other, but they're not touching. Now, right here where the apex comes together, where they all start to diverge from one another, I need to fill that with wax, because what happens is you don't want a point of plaster essentially to be the first point of contact with when that molten metal is going in there with force. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of time and I'm going to fill that up with some wax. Okay, so I'm just putting the finishing touches on this. You really want your main sprue, and all of your sprues actually, to be nice and smooth. You don't want to create a lot of turbulence in your metal as it's going into there. So this sprue is all done. Now we are ready to invest. So I'm just going to cut this off. We'll go through the investing process.